welcome to the Nola Louise Knits YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make the stretchy and invisible ribbed bind off for the back of my Starlette Bralette pattern. Now you can see in this finished version, the ribbing is very stretchy at the top and it flows seamlessly into the straps. Now I'll show the strap double-sided Kitchener bind off in another video, but for now I'm just going to show you how to work this edging here. I have an almost finished Starlette Bralette, and in the pattern I tell you to bind off when you first get to this, but as you can see here, I've actually gone ahead and worked the front and the straps because I wanted to make sure I was happy with the strap placement on the back. You can do this too, no matter which bind off method you're planning on using, either the invisible ribbed bind off or the just regular bind off. All you have to do is just, when you reach this row, cut a long length of yarn. You can see I have a length here that's probably about 4 times as long as my back, and then you'll resume right here in this corner for the fronts. And I just went ahead and knit all the fronts. And then I want to give you another tip. Now that I have my straps almost worked, I just held them to make sure I was happy with where they were going to be placed. And I went ahead and I placed some stitch markers according to the pattern to show where their straps are going to connect. Now this looks pretty stretched out. You know, this is the extra small size, so it's a 15 stitch wide strap. So this looks very wide, but keep in mind when you attach the strap, it's going to compress those 15 stitches. So it'll join together and be a bit more firm right there. Now what we're going to do when we bind off, it's helpful to place these markers in advance because then you won't accidentally bind off any more stitches than you intend to. We're going to bind off these stitches. Sorry, this is my side marker for the side ribbing. And then I have 4 more stitches before I get to the strap markers that I just placed. So we're only going to bind off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this will vary, of course, according to the size you're doing. And then we're going to just work these strap stitches as we would in the row below. So purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. So one thing to keep in mind, if you do decide that you want to change the placement of your straps, strap attachment, either move them closer together or further out, you just want to make sure that the stitches you mark off for the strap, and they will always be an odd number no matter what the size, you want to make sure that they begin and end with a purl stitch in the ribbing, because that will allow you to connect it seamlessly to the strap stitches. Okay, enough of that introduction, so let's get started doing the invisible ribbed bind off. So I'm just going to bring my needle over. Another thing to note, this first stitch, according to the pattern, should always be a knit stitch. So just make sure that you really are starting with a knit stitch. So we do 2 setup rows for the invisible ribbed bind off. We're only going to do these setup rows once. So the first of these setup rows is just to bring your yarn needle through that first knit stitch purlwise, just like a purl stitch. Pull it all the way through and give it a little tug just to make sure it's nice and firm with that corner. Then we're going to bring your needle around to the back of the work, and we're going to insert it between the first 2 stitches. So not into a stitch, just between. So from behind, between those 2 stitches. Pull the yarn through, and then insert the needle knitwise into that second stitch. So this time we actually are going through that second stitch knitwise, and then pull the yarn through. Whoops, little knot there. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to start the 4 steps that we're just going to repeat until we get to this first, this first strap marker here. We're going to insert the needle knitwise into the first stitch and slip it off the needle. Then we're going to insert the needle, this is step 2, purlwise into the new second stitch on the needle. So we're always going to refer to how many stitches we currently have on this needle as the current first stitch, current second stitch. Okay, so it's the second stitch on the needle. It's going to be a knit column, and we're going to insert the yarn needle purlwise into that stitch. Okay, step 3. We're going to insert the yarn needle purlwise into the first stitch and slip it off the needle. And then step 4, we're going to bring the yarn needle around to the back of the work, insert it between the first and second stitch, bring it through, and then insert it knitwise into the second stitch on the needle. Okay, so let's do those 4 steps again. First step, first knit stitch, we're going to slide knitwise off the needle. Step 2, we're going to go purlwise into the second stitch, and I can go ahead and remove this side marker because we don't need it anymore. So purlwise into the second stitch. Step 3, purlwise into the first stitch and slip it off. And step 4, around the back between the 2 stitches, and then knitwise through the second stitch. Okay, back to step 1. Knitwise off the first needle, and I'll show you, you can actually speed it up a little by sliding that stitch off, and then before you pull the yarn all the way through, go on to step 2, purlwise through the second stitch, and then pull the yarn all the way through here. So that just saves you a little bit of time. And then same thing here. Purlwise, this is step 3, purlwise through the first needle, slip it off. You don't yet need to pull it through, but then go around behind, go between those 2 stitches, and I pull it through here. And then we go knitwise into the first stitch. Now you'll see this is actually the first stitch of the strap. So we're not going to bind this stitch off, but connecting it this way with the bind off is great because it just kind of gives it more of a connection into the ribbing. Okay, so now we've only got 1 stitch left before our strap. So it's the first step of our pattern again. So that means it's a knitwise, slip the yarn off the needle. Now, instead of working step 2, instead I'm gonna take off my stitch marker here for the strap, and I'm going to grab a spare needle in my same needle size I've been using for knitting the bralette. And I'm going to just work regularly across those stitches that I marked off for the strap. So that's a purl, knit. In this size, it's a 15 stitch wide strap, but that will vary depending on your size that you're knitting. Sorry, you can hear my circular needle rattling around against the table. Okay. Okay, so those are my strap stitches. I'm just gonna kind of leave those alone, and I'm gonna pick up the yarn needle again to resume working. Now, because we just knitted, I'm going to do those 2 setup stitches again to make sure that there's a nice connection between the strap stitches and the ribbing. So remember the first setup stitch? It's actually just step 2 of the of the repeating 4. So it's a purl through that knit stitch and just leave it on the needle. Then we bring the yarn around through the back and go knitwise through that stitch. Okay, now we're ready to resume our pattern of 4 stitches. So first stitch knit and off the needle, second stitch on the left needle, purl through, and then I'm pulling the yarn. Okay, first stitch on the left needle, purl and off, and then bring the needle through the back, from the back between the first 2 stitches towards the front. Give it a nice tug, just kind of making sure I don't have anything catching there. And then going through the second stitch on the needle knitwise from front to back. Okay, we'll work one more set of 4. So first stitch knitwise off the needle, then purlwise through the second stitch, purlwise off the needle, and bring the yarn from the needle from back to front between those first and second stitches, and then knitwise through the second stitch. Okay, so you'll continue in this manner across until you get to the second strap and work it the same way you did the first one. And then don't forget to do your 2 setup rows, 2 setup steps when you resume binding off the other side of the strap. And then when you get to the end, I'll resume in just a second and show you what to do there. I've reached now the final 2 stitches of my back bind off. You can see it's nice and stretchy in between the straps, and it looks really nice with these knit stitches kind of folding over the top. So if you can see here, I've actually just worked step 2, which is the purlwise through that second knit stitch on the needle. So now I'm going to work step 3, which is slipping that first stitch purlwise off the needle, pull the yarn through. Now you remember step 4 is going from the back between those first and second stitches, but obviously we only have 1 stitch left. So I'll just go back next to that 1 stitch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find what would be the next stitch in that column. Do you see how there's this little loop here in that purl column? So I'm going to go, this pale pink one, I'm going to go knitwise into that just to connect the edge of that bind off with the side of the front of the bralette here. Okay, so then I've got 1 more stitch left, and we're going to do step 1, knitwise off the needle, pull it through, and then I'm going to look again at that edge, and it's this knit column here would have been the second stitch on the needle coming up. So I'm just going to find this stitch here, and I'm going to just go purlwise into it. You see that? It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's just a way to kind of anchor that edge a little more. And then I'm going to just kind of follow, see this blue stitch here? I'm just going to kind of follow the pattern of that stitch. And this way too, my end will be woven in, and it'll be a nice flowing into the edge from the back into the front. So yeah, that is how you work the invisible ribbed bind off on the Starlette bralette. And I hope you enjoy the pattern. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, and happy knitting.